Welcome, dear listener. I'm so glad you're here. Before we begin tonight's calming journey, don't forget to subscribe, tap the bell icon so you never miss a bedtime story. Leave a like if this helps you relax and share your thoughts in the comments. I love hearing from you. Now, lay back, take a deep breath, and let the world fade away. Wishing you a peaceful night, sweet dreams, and the deepest, most restful sleep. Let's begin.
Hello, and welcome to this comprehensive journey through the remarkable life of Theodore Roosevelt, the 26th President of the United States. A man of boundless energy, bold vision, and unwavering determination, Roosevelt's story is one of courage, reform, and legacy. From overcoming childhood illness to leading the nation through a transformative era, his life reads like a novel, filled with adventure, tragedy, and triumph. Today, we will explore his early years, political rise, wartime heroism, progressive presidency, and lasting impact on America and the world. Join me as we uncover the story of one of the most iconic figures in American history, Theodore Roosevelt. Early life and family background. Theodore Roosevelt was born on October 27, 1858, into a wealthy and influential family in New York City. His father, Theodore Roosevelt Sr., was a successful businessman and philanthropist, while his mother, Martha Bullock Roosevelt, came from a distinguished Southern family. The young Roosevelt was named after his father, destined to carry on the family's legacy. However, Theodore's early years were not without hardship. As a child, he suffered from severe asthma and other health problems that often left him weak and confined indoors. Rather than surrender to his frailty, Roosevelt developed a fierce determination to overcome his physical limitations. He embarked on a rigorous regimen of exercise, weightlifting, and outdoor activity. This early struggle forged the spirit of resilience that would define his life. The Roosevelts were a family deeply committed to education and culture. Theodore's father instilled in him a love of learning and a strong sense of morality. From an early age, Theodore was fascinated by nature, spending hours reading about animals, exploring the outdoors, and cultivating a lifelong passion for natural history. Despite his fragile health, Roosevelt excelled academically. He attended private schools before enrolling at Harvard College in 1876. There, he studied history and natural sciences, sharpening both his intellectual and leadership skills. Harvard was also where he first ventured into public speaking and politics, setting the foundation for his future career. In many ways, Theodore Roosevelt's childhood was a story of transformation, from a sickly boy to a robust young man ready to take on the challenges of the world. His family's wealth gave him opportunities, but it was his own determination and vigor that propelled him forward. Young adulthood and early career. After graduating from Harvard in 1880, Roosevelt plunged into public life with characteristic energy. He entered the political arena in New York City, winning a seat in the New York State Assembly at the age of 23. Roosevelt's early political career was marked by a passion for reform and a willingness to confront entrenched corruption in city government. But his life was also shaped by profound personal tragedy. In 1884, on the same day, both his beloved wife Alice Hathaway Lee and his mother Martha died. His wife from complications after childbirth, and his mother unexpectedly at home. The grief was overwhelming. Roosevelt retreated to the Badlands of North Dakota,
seeking solace in the rugged wilderness. There, he worked as a rancher and cowboy, embracing a harsh frontier life that tempered his character and deepened his appreciation for the American West. This period was transformative for Roosevelt. The physical demands of ranching built his strength and endurance, while the solitude allowed him to reflect on his purpose and future. Emerging from the Badlands, Roosevelt was renewed, ready to re-enter public life with a stronger sense of mission. He married Edith Kermit Carow in 1886, and together they raised a family while he resumed his political career. Roosevelt continued to champion reform causes, fighting for civil service improvements and battling political corruption. By the early 1890s, Roosevelt had established himself as a rising star in New York politics, admired for his energy, integrity, and progressive ideas. His reputation would soon extend beyond state politics as he assumed new and influential roles in the national government.
Rise in politics. In the mid-1890s, Theodore Roosevelt's political career accelerated rapidly. After serving multiple terms in the New York State Assembly, Roosevelt was appointed New York City Police Commissioner in 1895. This role thrust him into the heart of the city's power struggles. Roosevelt aggressively fought corruption and sought to reform the police force, improving discipline and rooting out inefficiency. His success as police commissioner earned him national recognition, but Roosevelt's ambitions stretched beyond local politics. In 1897, he was appointed Assistant Secretary of the Navy under President William McKinley. This position allowed Roosevelt to influence America's military policy at a time when the United States was beginning to emerge as a global power. Roosevelt's tenure at the Navy Department was marked by his vigorous advocacy for naval expansion. He believed a strong Navy was essential for protecting American interests abroad and projecting influence on the world stage. His calls for modernization and preparedness would prove prescient, as the nation soon faced international conflict. Despite his official duties, Roosevelt grew restless and yearned for direct action. When the Spanish-American War broke out in 1898, Roosevelt resigned his post to form and lead a volunteer cavalry regiment known as the Rough Riders. The Rough Rider and the Spanish-American War. The Spanish-American War marked a defining chapter in Theodore Roosevelt's life. Commanding the Rough Riders, a diverse group of cowboys, miners, law enforcement officers, and Ivy League athletes, Roosevelt demonstrated his leadership and bravery during the Battle of San Juan Hill in Cuba. The charge up San Juan Hill became legendary. Roosevelt's charismatic leadership and courage inspired his men under heavy fire, securing a crucial victory for the American forces. This triumph elevated Roosevelt to national hero status almost overnight. The war itself was brief but impactful. It signaled the United States' emergence as an imperial power with overseas territories, including Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. Roosevelt's exploits during the war bolstered his public image as a vigorous, action-oriented leader, eager to serve his country both on and off the battlefield. Returning from Cuba, Roosevelt's popularity surged. He capitalized on this momentum to win the governorship of New York in 1899, where he continued pushing progressive reforms and challenging political corruption. Governor of New York. As governor of New York, Roosevelt implemented an ambitious agenda aimed at modernizing government and protecting the public welfare. He fought vigorously against political machines and corporate monopolies that had long dominated the state. Roosevelt's reforms included measures to regulate the insurance industry, improve factory safety, and strengthen labor laws. He was an early advocate for fair treatment of workers and consumers, reflecting his broader commitment to the square deal philosophy that would later define his presidency. His tenure as governor was stood by a dynamic balance between reform and pragmatism. Roosevelt understood the power of politics and used it skillfully to advance progressive policies while navigating entrenched interests. Though his time as governor was brief, Roosevelt's impact was significant. His achievements in New York positioned him as a leading national figure and prepared him for the next stage of his career. Vice Presidency and Ascension to the Presidency. In 1900, Roosevelt was selected as the Republican vice presidential candidate alongside incumbent President William McKinley. The ticket won decisively, but Roosevelt's role as vice president was relatively limited at first. However, on September 14, 1901, President McKinley was assassinated by an anarchist. At the age of 42, Theodore Roosevelt was sworn in as the youngest president in American history. The sudden transition thrust Roosevelt into the nation's highest office during a period of rapid change and opportunity. Roosevelt brought with him the energy, boldness, and reformist zeal that would transform the presidency itself. Presidency and policies. Theodore Roosevelt's presidency, from 1901 to 1909, was a watershed era in American history. He believed the government must act to protect the public from powerful interests and ensure fairness, a philosophy he called the square deal. Trust-busting and economic reform. Roosevelt vigorously pursued antitrust actions against large corporations that stifled competition. His administration filed lawsuits against monopolies such as the Northern Securities Company, demonstrating his commitment to regulating business in the public interest. Conservation and national parks. A passionate outdoorsman, Roosevelt championed conservation like no previous president. He established numerous national parks, forests, and wildlife refuges, preserving millions of acres for future generations. Roosevelt's vision laid the foundation for America's modern environmental movement. Foreign policy and the Panama Canal. Roosevelt expanded America's global presence. He orchestrated the construction of the Panama Canal, a monumental engineering project that linked the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans and boosted American naval power and commerce. He also pursued a vigorous foreign policy, famously summarized as "speak softly and carry a big stick," emphasizing diplomacy backed by military strength. Peace and the Nobel Prize. Roosevelt's leadership extended to international diplomacy. He brokered peace in the Russo-Japanese War, for which he became the first American to win the Nobel Peace Prize in 1906. Post-Presidency and legacy. After leaving office in 1909, Roosevelt remained active in public life. He embarked on explorations in Africa and South America, wrote extensively, and campaigned for progressive reforms. In 1912, dissatisfied with his successor, William Howard Taft, Roosevelt formed the Progressive Party, also known as the Bull Moose Party, and ran for president again. Though he lost, his campaign influenced the national debate on social and economic reforms. Roosevelt's final years were marked by continued advocacy for strong leadership and public service until his death in 1919. Today, Theodore Roosevelt is remembered as a transformative figure, a president who reshaped the office, championed reform and conservation, and inspired generations with his courage and vision. His legacy endures in America's parks, policies, and spirit. Legends and myths of Theodore Roosevelt. Few figures in American history have inspired as many colorful stories, bold claims, and legendary tales as Theodore Roosevelt. His larger-than-life personality made him a natural subject for myth-making, and Roosevelt himself, with a wink and a grin, often allowed the legends to flourish. Here are some of the most enduring myths and true tales, some factual, some exaggerated, but all part of the Roosevelt mystique. 1. The Bulletproof President, the assassination attempt. One of the most famous and true stories about Roosevelt took place during the 1912 presidential campaign. While in Milwaukee to deliver a speech, Roosevelt was shot in the chest by a would-be assassin, John Schrank. The bullet pierced his glasses case and passed through a folded 50-page speech in his coat pocket before lodging in his chest muscle. Miraculously, the bullet missed his lungs and heart. Bleeding, but unshaken, Roosevelt insisted on delivering his speech anyway. He stood before the crowd and declared, "It takes more than one bullet to kill a bull moose." He spoke for 90 minutes before seeking medical attention. The bullet remained in his chest for the rest of his life. This act of courage became legend and symbolized Roosevelt's unbreakable will. 2. The teddy bear origin. The beloved stuffed animal, the teddy bear, owes its name to Roosevelt. In 1902, while on a hunting trip in Mississippi, Roosevelt famously refused to shoot a black bear that had been captured and tied up for him to kill. Though an avid hunter, Roosevelt deemed the act unsportsmanlike. News of the incident spread, and political cartoonist Clifford Berryman illustrated it in a widely circulated cartoon titled "Drawing the Line in Mississippi." Inspired by the story, a toy maker created a stuffed bear and asked Roosevelt's permission to name it Teddy's Bear. He agreed, and a new American icon was born. 3. The Cowboy President and the Dakota Outlaws. During his time in the Badlands, Roosevelt didn't just herd cattle, he also hunted down outlaws. In 1886, when thieves stole his boat from the Elkhorn Ranch, Roosevelt and 2 ranch hands built a makeshift boat and pursued the criminals down the Little Missouri River. After a days-long chase, Roosevelt captured the men, disarmed them, and brought them to justice, reading books while guarding them overnight. The tale became the stuff of frontier legend and solidified his image as a Western lawman. 4. Roosevelt, the boxer, and the blind eye. Roosevelt was an accomplished amateur boxer. He boxed regularly at Harvard and continued to spar during his presidency. But few know that he sustained a serious injury while in the White House. During a match with a younger military aide, Roosevelt was hit hard in the face. He later wrote that the blow detached the retina in his left eye, rendering him nearly blind in that eye for the rest of his life. He kept the injury secret for years. Even partially blinded, he later took up judo and became the first American president to study martial arts. 5. The man who read a book a day.
Roosevelt's boundless energy extended to his intellect. It's said he read a book every day, sometimes two, even while serving as president. Though it sounds exaggerated, the legend is rooted in truth. Roosevelt was an incredibly fast and voracious reader. He read across subjects: history, philosophy, poetry, biology, and novels, and often wrote detailed letters or essays about what he read. His personal library eventually exceeded 6,000 books. 6. Roosevelt rode a moose? One of the most persistent images of Roosevelt is a famous doctored photo of him riding a giant moose through a river, wearing a suit and holding the reins casually in one hand. This iconic image was part of a 1912 campaign photo montage and, though faked, it captured the way Americans saw Roosevelt: fearless, rugged, and unstoppable. A man who would ride a moose if he felt like it. 7. The Lion Hunter of Africa. After leaving the presidency, Roosevelt embarked on a legendary safari through East and Central Africa. Sponsored by the Smithsonian Institution, the expedition collected specimens for American museums. But it also fed the myth of Roosevelt as a great white hunter. Over 11,000 animals were cataloged, from birds and reptiles to big game like lions, elephants, and rhinos. While this was a scientific expedition by the standards of the time, today it's viewed more critically due to the massive scale of the hunt. Still, the image of Roosevelt facing down charging elephants and prowling lions only enhanced his mythic status. Fact and fiction, blurred lines. Roosevelt's life was so extraordinary that fact and legend often blur. He didn't mind. "Let the public have its fun," he once said when asked about exaggerated tales. He understood, better than most, that myth can be powerful.
Love, loss, and the women in Roosevelt's life. Though Theodore Roosevelt is often remembered for his rugged masculinity, political battles, and adventures in the wild, his emotional life was shaped just as powerfully by the women who loved him, and whom he loved deeply in return. Beneath the tough, barrel-chested exterior was a man of deep romantic feeling, loyalty, and heartache. Alice Hathaway Lee, The First Love. Theodore Roosevelt met Alice Hathaway Lee in 1878 while attending Harvard. She was elegant, beautiful, and came from a prominent Boston family. Roosevelt was smitten immediately, writing in his diary, "as sweet and pure and beautiful as a flower." They courted for over a year. Alice was quiet and reserved, very unlike Roosevelt's loud, impulsive personality. But the contrast seemed to deepen his affection for her. They were married on October 27, 1880, Roosevelt's 22nd birthday. Their relationship, though tragically brief, was filled with adoration. He called her "my purest queen" and rarely left her side. But happiness gave way to devastation. Just 2 days after giving birth to their only child, Alice Lee Roosevelt, on February 12, 1884, Alice died of nephritis, Bright's disease. Hours earlier, Roosevelt's mother, Martha, had died of typhoid fever, both women passing in the same house on the same day. In his diary that night, Roosevelt drew a large X and wrote one simple sentence: "The light has gone out of my life." He rarely spoke of Alice again and never mentioned her name in his autobiography. Her death left an emotional scar he carried for the rest of his life. Edith Kermit Caro,
the constant companion. Years later, Roosevelt rekindled a childhood friendship with Edith Kermit Caro. The two had grown up together in New York, and though Edith had once been close with Theodore during their youth, their relationship had ended awkwardly before his marriage to Alice. But in 1885, Roosevelt reconnected with Edith. They shared a deep intellectual bond, similar social backgrounds, and a belief in public service. They married in December 1886 in London. Edith became the First Lady of New York and later the First Lady of the United States. Though not as publicly affectionate as his first marriage, Roosevelt's relationship with Edith was built on partnership, mutual respect, and shared ambition. She was fiercely intelligent, politically savvy, and protective of his legacy. They had 5 children together, in addition to raising Alice Lee. Edith managed the household with grace and strength, often shielding Roosevelt from political distractions and personal conflicts. She endured his wild energy, global travel, and even his obsession with physical danger. When Roosevelt was shot in 1912, it was Edith who rushed to his side and managed his care in secret.
3. The rumors and the myths. Despite Roosevelt's high-profile life, there is no substantial historical evidence of extramarital affairs. This in itself is notable, considering the turbulent private lives of many public figures of the era. However, his charisma and masculinity attracted admiration from women across the country, and sometimes exaggerated rumors. Letters from female admirers poured into the White House. Some were flirtatious, others deeply emotional, seeing in Roosevelt a symbol of courage, strength, and moral certainty. Though he was intensely admired, Roosevelt remained loyal to Edith throughout their marriage. His devotion was shaped, perhaps, by the trauma of losing Alice, a loss that seemed to make him fiercely protective of his second marriage and private life. 4. Alice Roosevelt Longworth, the Wild Daughter. Roosevelt's daughter from his first marriage, Alice Lee Roosevelt, became a national sensation in the early 1900s. Known for her wit, style, and rebelliousness, she often clashed with Edith and occasionally embarrassed her father with her antics, such as smoking on the White House roof, racing cars, and keeping a pet snake in her purse. Roosevelt once said, "I can be President of the United States, or I can control Alice. I cannot possibly do both." Despite her independence, Roosevelt was proud of Alice and shared a complex but enduring bond with her. Her sharp intellect and public presence often mirrored his own. Roosevelt's view on women and society. Roosevelt was both progressive and traditional in his views on women. He supported education and physical activity for girls, encouraged female reformers in the progressive era, and admired strong women, particularly those in his own family. Yet he also idealized a certain moral and domestic role for women, in keeping with the values of his time. He once said, "The woman's task is not easy. No task worth doing is easy, but it is the most glorious of all tasks." His respect for women stemmed from personal experience, from his mother's southern grace to Alice's tragic beauty and Edith's fierce intellect. Each shaped the man he became. Roosevelt's emotional life was rich with love, tragedy, and devotion. While much of the public saw only the cowboy and warrior, those closest to him knew a deeply affectionate man, capable of profound grief, fierce loyalty, and romantic idealism. Behind the Rough Rider, the boxer, and the bull moose lived a man who never forgot the women who shaped his soul. Roosevelt's children. The legacy lives on. Theodore Roosevelt was not only a reformer, a war hero, and a president.
He was also the father of 6 children. His home life was as full of energy, ambition, and drama as his public career. To Roosevelt, the family was the core of the republic, and his children were expected to carry forward the Roosevelt spirit of honor, courage, and service. But being a Roosevelt child was no easy task. Their father was larger than life. Expectations were enormous, and their lives would reflect the pressures of carrying his name. 1. Alice Lee Roosevelt, 1884 to 1980. Daughter of Alice Hathaway Lee. The only child from Roosevelt's first marriage, Alice became America's first true political celebrity. With her striking beauty, acid wit, and rebellious nature, she was adored by the public, and often a handful for her stepmother Edith and her father. As first daughter during Roosevelt's presidency, Alice captivated the press. She smoked in public, bet on horse races, and traveled on diplomatic missions. In 1905, she married Congressman Nicholas Longworth, but their marriage was rocky. Though outspoken and politically engaged, Alice carved her own identity apart from her father. She was close friends with Taft, then a fierce critic of Wilson and later of FDR. Her famous quote, "If you can't say something good about someone, sit right here by me," captured her sharp tongue. She remained a Washington socialite and political influencer well into her 90s, a true Roosevelt, bold and unforgettable. 2. Theodore Roosevelt Jr., 1887 to 1944, oldest son of Theodore and Edith. Ted Jr. was the child most like his father, disciplined, principled, and ambitious. He served with distinction in both world wars and held several political and administrative roles, including Assistant Secretary of the Navy, like his father, Governor of Puerto Rico, and Governor General of the Philippines. His finest hour came during World War II. At 56 and suffering from arthritis and heart disease, Ted insisted on leading the first wave of troops onto Utah Beach during the D-Day invasion in 1944. He was the only general to land with the first wave and famously redirected troops with a cane while under fire. He died of a heart attack shortly after the Normandy landings and was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, one of the few father-son pairs in U.S. history to both receive the nation's highest military honor. Kermit Roosevelt, 1889 to 1943. Second son Kermit inherited his father's intellectual curiosity and love for adventure, but also his darker struggles. He accompanied his father on the famous River of Doubt expedition through the Amazon in 1913-14, where he saved his father's life after illness and injury. Kermit served in both world wars and was decorated for bravery, but he struggled with depression and alcoholism much of his life. In 1943, while serving in Alaska during World War II, Kermit died by suicide. His death was quietly reported as illness, but the Roosevelt family and the nation mourned deeply. 4. Ethel Caro Roosevelt Derby, 1891 to 1977. Only daughter of Edith and Theodore, Ethel was known as the most dutiful and reserved of the Roosevelt children, a calming presence amid her brother's wildness. She served as her father's aide in the White House and was deeply involved in nursing and Red Cross work during both World Wars.
Ethel married Dr. Richard Derby and led a life of public service and quiet resilience. She avoided the limelight, but remained a strong voice for conservation and Roosevelt's legacy, especially in preserving Sagamore Hill, the family home. 5. Archibald Archie Roosevelt, 1894 to 1979. Fourth child. Archie served with distinction in World War I, where he was severely wounded. He later served again in World War II, making him and his brother Ted Jr. the only two American generals who had fought in both wars. In his post-war life, Archie worked in business, but became a fierce political critic, especially of Franklin D. Roosevelt, his cousin. He remained loyal to his father's ideals of rugged individualism and national strength. 6. Quentin Roosevelt, 1897 to 1918. Youngest son. The baby of the family, Quentin was bright, charming, and fearless. He shared his father's love of books, laughter, and daring. When the U.S. entered World War I, Quentin dropped out of Harvard and joined the Army Air Service. He was killed in aerial combat over France in July 1918 at just 20 years old. A devastating blow to the Roosevelt family and the nation. Roosevelt wept when he learned the news. His son had died for the ideals he himself had lived by: courage, sacrifice, and service. Quentin's death was seen as the ultimate patriotic loss. Even German pilots buried him with full honors. The Roosevelt Children's Legacy. Of Theodore Roosevelt's 6 children, 5 served in world wars. 1 died in combat. 1 took his own life after battle trauma. 1 became a national icon. All were shaped by their father's spirit. Though they lived in his shadow, each child bore a piece of his legacy through heroism, heartbreak, wit, or public service. Finally left a family, a nation, a name. Theodore Roosevelt believed in duty, to country, to conscience, to family. His children's lives, filled with triumph and tragedy, reflected both the brilliance and burden of his legacy. Through their service, loss, and memory, the Roosevelt name became not just a political one, but a deeply human story of what it means to live boldly and carry forward a great American dream.